Solutions, and I was the COO of an AI safety organization called Conjecture, which is based here in London. Prior to that, I worked at a hedge fund in operations and did a little bit of AI research on the side around a frame called simulators and thinking about large language models, which are, as Eric said, just massive data correlations, as having the potential to simulate these sort of multiverses of text. And in that, there's a lot of potential. One more. Sweet. So the first thing I actually wrote publicly for the AI safety space was on this question of mental health and the alignment problem, because it was very quick in my own experience in this field that I encountered what I would call the hyper-object of AI. And what I mean by hyper-object is a bit like, maybe some of you know that story of like the blind men touching the elephant, and they're all touching different parts of it. Some are on the leg, and like, oh, it's really sturdy. On the trunk, it's very soft. So a hyper-object is a bit like that mentally. It's something that you encounter where you're just feeling part of it, but you recognize that the entirety of it is enormous. It's this huge psychological object where you can only see it a bit, but you feel the gravity of it. You feel the sort of intensity of this idea. And I think that's a decent sort of abstraction to talk about AI with. What we've seen over the last 20 years or so is AI go from this niche interest in a very small group of people to a topic of geopolitical importance. And when I say AI here, I'm talking more specifically about artificial general intelligence, or the idea that we're able to create AI that is as smart or smarter than humans. I've got these little QR codes in the bottom. I think they're probably too small to scan, but sending the slides around later, these link to the documents and give folks a reference there. And one of the things that's interesting about this sort of hyper-object presentation of AGI is that it doesn't rely at all on the technical underpinnings of what we're talking about here. And it's possible to get into those. It's possible to make the argument that correlates the very low-level mathematics to, okay, now we've got Putin-level AI dictators who are sort of organizing society. You can do that from a purely technical sense, but I think you can also do it from a sort of spiritual, emotional sense as well, which is like something about this with AGI is sucking in the world's attention. It started as a very small thing, and now we have the world's top leaders thinking about this as an extremely high priority. We've got top mathematicians and scientists and businesses all working on this problem. And there's something about this hyperobject that is seductive. It's addicting. It's bringing people in. And so just on first approximation, when we talk about mental health and what Buddhism can contribute to the space, I think seeing this as a kind of hybrid technical, emotional, spiritual problem is a good starting place. And I think Buddhism has good epistemics to think about this through, because it's very clear from a kind of Buddhist conception how one's own mind and one's own beliefs become the very source for actions that then lead to large changes in the world. This is a bit of a karmic model about how intentions can go to long-term behaviors and then change the future in significant ways. And so, yeah, my hope is that Buddhists can kind of get it a bit quicker than some others, because there's other ways into these arguments rather than the purely technical route. Next slide. One thing that Sam was talking about is like some of these crazy futures that people imagine, where if you think that AI is going to be kind of like today's technology, or maybe a little bit more powerful, primarily you're worrying about today's issues with AI, which is disinformation, deepfakes, now AI sort of psychosis being a more popular topic, and power concentration among the people who are building this technology. But if you think that the technology we build could get to the level where it's as smart or smarter than humans and exert, dictator-level control, you suddenly start to ask the question of, well, who's in charge of that? Who gets to shape the future? And you end up with these conversations around geopolitical domination. The very first line of the US's AI action plan says something along the lines of, we are in a global race to, win as it relates to AI. There's a zero-sum game here, and maybe the economy is not zero-sum, but power is. That's a direct quote from David Sachs, who's the AI czar in the US. So then there's the question of, if you build technology that powerful, is it controllable? And for those who think it's uncontrollable, you have this risk of, actually, it's not a human-controlled future, it's bad for anyone who builds it, and you end up in existential risk territory. So all of these things are sort of deviation points on a general argument from how powerful do you think it will be, and then given that power level, how controllable do you think technology like that will be? This is a very negative framing, of course. It's primarily viewed from risk terms, but I think when we deal with more and more powerful systems, this is a natural sort of place for humans to end up. Because as we exert more power over the world, that needs to be commensurate with the wisdom that we're holding in order to use that power wisely. And if the wisdom that we have isn't really there to point the power or our intelligence in the right direction, then things go wrong all over the place. Another reason why Buddhism and AI might be topics that come together. Next slide. So the program I'm running now, it's a small nonprofit. It's myself and 4 others. And we've got this website, engagebuddhist.ai. We call ourselves the Buddhism and AI Initiative. And the reason for this, hopefully will be sort of obvious by the end of this talk, if not already, is largely that as I was in the space of AI and was the COO of this AI company, I was like holding myself down the whole time through Buddhist practice. I was living in Kaju Samyazong, which is the Kaju monastery here in London. The daily practice there was extremely helpful for me, but also the kind of ontology that Buddhism presents offers a different worldview through which to see many of the things that are happening today. And so it was both formal practice and sort of Buddhist worldviews that ended up being a bit of a safety net for me in this territory where such extreme ideas can lead people first to anxiety and then to burnout and then to entire lives that are sort of wrapped into a destructive spiral around this. And I say this with no exaggeration. Some of my closest friends in this space have had serious issues with addiction, first from overdoing it with stimulants because they felt they needed to work really, really hard on this problem, and then from serious burnout and then alcoholism. So it's no joke. I think really psychologically getting involved in these topics carries serious risk. Next slide, please. So I don't need to anonymize this too much because this guy's quite public with these views. This is Chokyi Rinpoche. He says, there has always been greed, pride, jealousy. But now, thanks to technology, these forces are so powerful. Greed is so powerful. Jealousy is so powerful. Pride is so powerful. And again, this is where sort of the Buddhist karmic view can help us. These are basic mental conditions. These exist until we get rid of them. But the way in which artificial intelligence sort of extends the conditions of today's era is that it amplifies and it magnifies and it sort of increases the power of all of the current conditions that are in the world. And we see this in people's views about AI. If you're coming to this world from a very optimistic view, you can look at AI and say, this is going to be so great. It's going to take all of the wonderful things in the world that we have today and extend those and make the world even better. And if you're coming to the world from the place of, hey, wait, climate's not doing so good and political realities are not so good, well, AI speeding up all of those conditions suddenly looks very frightening. And so I think a lot of the arguments about, is AI wholesome, is it unwholesome, are really people starting worldviews being magnified through this very complex lens and then trying to be hashed out through technical disagreements that are not actually about some of the really deep intuitions that people have about the world. But what this view suggests is that there's a Buddhist framing on this of AI as a karmic accelerator, a thing that takes the current conditions and speeds them up and magnifies them back to us. Next slide, please. So the first project that my group did was we went and we talked to all of the people we knew slightly at the intersection of Buddhism and AI. Many of you are in the room, and thank you for those conversations. And we were trying to get to 2 things. The first was, what do Buddhists already think about AI? Like, what's sort of the general milieu and vibe there? And the second was, what are they doing about it? And so this first slide is sort of on what they think about it, and there's a bit of a general understanding of risk around AI. But I want to differentiate it a bit from the type of risk that Sam was talking about. Western Buddhism in particular, I think, has adopted a normative view about climate risk, and as part of this, a term that some people call the polycrisis, which is you can't really solve climate on its own because it's so tied in with economic factors and business factors and technology, and it's all wrapped together. And on top of that, people are stressed, and it's their anxiety that's leading to them behaving this way, and so you can't really solve that without addressing public health. The fact that all of these things are tied together represents the polycrisis. You can't solve any problem because it all needs to be unwound together. I'd say that's a pretty native Buddhist view, at least in Western contexts. And so when AI comes into this, people feel that and they say, okay, I don't expect AI to necessarily unwind the conditions in the ways that I experience. And because of that, I expect some of these problems listed here to grow. Consolidation of wealth and power, wrong view and moral confusion, erosion of critical thinking is a big one that people mention with AI. I think Buddhists have a very normative sense of inner work, the type of thing that can't be automated, that you need to do yourself. And from that, you can get sort of a more critical perspective on what education is doing. It's not just facts and sort of trying to get to the output, it's really on the way that your mind is turning and learning itself. Displacement and loss of meaning, disconnection from nature, speed, overwhelm, loss of agency. And a very kind of particular Buddhist concern is erosion of Dharma transmission, which is the idea that Dharma transmission has always been human to human. And while we've used texts, those texts have been written on first order by a human. And so you can really feel the presence of realization through texts. And now that we have sort of another layer on that, text from AI that's written and based on other texts, there's more and more of a disconnection between the original realization and the outputs of these models. And so there's a question then, can AI sort of properly transmit the Dharma, or with each generation of synthetic text, we're getting further and further away from the actual substance? Next slide, please. But I think Buddhists are pretty balanced, and so with every person who mentioned a risk, there was also sort of a noting of a silver lining and opportunities here, and some of those are very direct for Buddhists. And so there's the question of how can this technology speed up Buddhism? If you're already sympathetic to what's going on there, how can that go better? And you've got things like AI translation really helping with Tibetan already just in the last few years. You've got LLM tools, semantic search, chatbot teachers. Theon in the back there is training a chatbot that is sort of doing a diagnostic, hey, is what you're perceiving in reality actually what you think that you're perceiving? Like a sort of Socratic method of dialogue. And so you have AI technology that's already helping with a lot of the Buddhist project. Sorry, just two more things on that last slide. Another thing that was commonly pointed out in terms of a silver lining is the sort of mirror to self in humanity. And one of the things that's really interesting about the whole AI conversation is that because it takes you from this super minute level of the mathematics all the way up to the soteriological aspect of like, what kind of society should we build? And it's very personal, it's based on your own view. All of these different aspects come into a single conversation and create super fruitful territory for dharmic work, which is you see the interplay of all of these things and you realize that making small changes to the way that you're personally attending to the situation can provide more clarity on how to build a better world, and that all of this stuff is really wrapped up and tied together. And many Buddhists understood that the more difficult conditions we end up in, the more fruitful of a time it is for practice and realization, and that there is sort of this positive aspect even in the darkest moments around AI. And finally, I mentioned Buddhist wisdom for AI alignment. One of the solutions that people talk about broadly to this, okay, AI is getting extremely powerful, what are we going to do about it thing, is that we need to instill super ethical and moral values into the AI and align it with the types of things that are most beneficial and flourishing for humanity. And for thousands of years, Buddhism as a project has been, in a certain sense, trying to instill human alignment algorithms. It's trying to take human minds, which are normally filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, and clean them up to the point where they can act on behalf of all sentient beings. And so Buddhism can be seen as a psychotechnology that has some very precise methods to help humans go through this sort of alignment process. And the question is, can we learn from that and use some of those same principles in advanced AI? Next slide. So after speaking to about 100 people, we started to notice patterns in who knew whom and what they were working on and what sort of theories of change were underneath their work. And when I say theories of change, what I mean is this AI problem is so multifactorial that you can just touch it on many different sides. And so some people might be concerned about governance, others on the technical risk, others on the social side. And when you think about how Buddhism in this problem touch, it's all of those same places. Anywhere where there's work to be done, there can be work done from a Buddhist lens as well. And so I've already spoken about two of these. Buddhist knowledge infrastructure is really this way in which technology can serve Buddhism. Translation, transmission, intertextual studies, there's all sorts of things where Buddhism becoming more modernized technically will just help the Buddhist project. That's different from the technology for practice and alignment worldview because of a different theory of change. In the Buddhist knowledge infrastructure world, the sense is the way the world is going to get better is that Buddhism is going to serve more people and it's going to scale. So then the question becomes, how do you scale Buddhism? And how do you use tech to help with this? In the technology for practice and alignment sense, there's sort of a different question, which is technology is going to be one of the primary vectors that influences the future. And so that's where we need to do our work and put our attention. And how can we build technology that is wise, that has Buddhist values or principles in it, or it has an understanding of emptiness? And how does that then serve and benefit humanity? Different technical agendas underneath each of these, but a shared common theme of something in Buddhism and something in AI that both matter. Quickly going through the rest of these, scholarship, philosophy, and science is really the frontiers of knowledge and academic conversation on this. There's a very different conversation happening in the Buddhist space, in the contemplative neuroscience space, and in the AI space. But all the things they're talking about are quite important. And so how do we build bridges and make sure those dialogues are happening in ways that are beneficial? Teaching and community is really the direct Dharma transmission aspect of this. What do Buddhist teachers need to know so that they can serve their populations better as it relates to AI? And if you really think that this powerful technology is coming in a short amount of time, the world might get very crazy. And crazy worlds mean destabilized populations, mental health crises, and more people who are really worried about how the future goes. And so what do you need to know both to serve those people and help them get calm, but beyond that, to become productive? I think it's really quite a question here of turning this Buddhist wisdom into flourishing and productive action. Governance, policy, and civic leadership is the realpolitik aspect. This is being decided by companies with billions and potentially trillions of dollars and major world leaders. What does Buddhism have to do with that? Is there any sort of connection between world power and Buddhism here? And finally, ecosystem and capacity building is the folks like my organization, Wisdom in AI, conference hosters, as well as funders in this space who are thinking about this sort of as an ecosystem and all the ways in which this could move forward. So yeah, I'll send the slides around afterwards, but all of these have a lot more that you can dig into them. There's actually like a list with the people and organizations, and there's some presentations of sort of interviews and different conversations we've had around Buddhism and AI. Hopefully that gives a bit of a taxonomy and some ways in which these two worlds touch, but it's obviously a very deep conversation. Thank you.